everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the August My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. In the August kit, we received some beautiful papers from Prima Marketing. I'm also going to be using one of the cut files that's available to My Creative Scrapbook subscribers. To start off this layout, I took a number of strips of paper and I cut them into thin strips and inked the edges. My plan is to have strips of paper in each of the four corners. I'm going to draw a diagonal in each corner at a 45-degree angle, and that's going to help guide me placing those strips of paper down on the layout. To help guide me with drawing those 45-degree angles, I drew a horizontal line and a vertical line down the center of the page. Then I connected the spot where those lines intersected with the edge of the paper to create the 45-degree angles. Now I'm drawing some diagonal lines. I have my extra long ruler. I line the ruler up with two corners and that center spot in the page, and I draw a line. And now I'm drawing a line at 1-inch intervals. And this looks a little bit like a quilt plan here, but you'll see in a little while how this helps me with putting my strips down. Now I'm going to use those little marks that I made at 1-inch intervals to create diagonals on the page. These lines are going to help me position the strips of paper down on the page. I sometimes skip this step, and whenever I do, I always regret it. These lines really help to make sure that the first piece of paper is straight down to the very last piece of paper that I put down on the layout. Then I flip the paper and I begin drawing diagonals in the other direction. And I think I got a little carried away and made the lines all the way to the corner. I won't need those, but that's okay. It won't hurt anything. So now I'm attaching the strips of paper. I inked the edges of all of these strips of paper using some Distress Oxide in Victorian velvet. I started off thinking that I wanted to have all different size strips of paper, some really thick, some really thin, but later on I decided that I wanted the strips of paper to all be on the thinner side. So off camera, I cut some of those thicker strips in half. I used some ATG adhesive to hold the strips down, and that makes those pencil lines a little blurry and makes it look a little bit messy, but it doesn't matter because in the end, everything's going to get covered up. I always say I'm going to use pen the next time, and then I always forget because I'm so used to using a pencil for measuring. I continued adding strips of paper in all four corners, and I'll bring that back in a little while so you could see what it looks like. I did something a little bit different for me on this cut file. I decided that I would pick a different pattern paper and cut it out using the internal offset function on the Silhouette Cameo. This helps me to make a letter that is a little bit smaller than the one that's there. You could still see the border of the other pattern paper, but I thought that this would add an element that would add some interest to the cut file and also break up the larger area of pattern paper. I used some fun foam and I popped up each of the letters. I also inked the edges with the Distress Oxide in Victorian velvet. Now I'm going to start working on a piece that I'm going to put on its side in the center of the layout, and all this will make sense in a little while when I assemble everything. The piece of white cardstock is 8.5 inches square. I'm using some punched out border strips and attaching them along the edge. Now I have it placed on the layout, and you could see the strips of paper and you could see how this paper is going to sit on the layout. I wanted to cut the border strips so that the edges would fit together well. In the end, it didn't really matter because it didn't dawn on me that this part of the square is going to get cut off, but this is how it could be done if you need to have a straight or a neat corner when joining two border strips together. I flipped the square over to the back and then I drew a line connecting opposite corners, and then I cut straight through that line with my scissors, and then that created a nice neat corner, which I'm going to cut off in a little while. I want to make a number of layers on this layout. I want there to be a lot of different pattern papers working next to each other. So I cut one of the pattern papers that was in the kit to cover the white square. I want to just mention that the reason I have two watches on is that I have used a Fitbit for years. For my birthday, my husband got me an Apple Watch, but the Apple Watch was counting my steps much differently than the Fitbit. So I was just doing a comparison, and that's why I have both of those on my wrist. I have to say that does look a little odd. I layered another white square on top of the square that I already had just to make it look a little bit neater. Now I'm attaching the pattern paper square down. I inked the edges of that with the Victorian velvet as well. And I placed that on the layout, but I didn't attach it down yet. I want to add more elements to the page. I'm using a Martha Stewart scoring board to take strips of paper and score them at every 1/4 inch. This paper measures approximately 1¼ inches by 12 inches. I created another layout in which I used accordion folded pieces of paper. So I decided that I would use those leftover papers. You could see some strips off to the right, along with these strips of paper. I'm going to be layering the white strips and the pattern paper strips together. I'm now folding the paper back and forth until I have folded the entire strip. And then I continued doing the same thing to 3 more strips of paper. At first I had 3 strips of the pattern paper that were already folded. I cut one of them in half because I knew that I only needed a little border of the pattern paper. That was going to be all that was visible on the layout. So I cut one of the strips in half, and now I have 4 strips, 2 of them smaller, 2 of them bigger, but because I'm going to be tucking them under that square that I was preparing, they'll all end up looking the same. I attached the strips together using some ATG adhesive. I was a little hesitant to do that the first time I tried attaching strips together. I was afraid that the adhesive wouldn't go easily over the folded paper, but it ended up working just fine. I'm going to begin attaching these strips of paper down to the square. I folded down the 2 corners to create a folded line that was at a 45-degree angle, and then I cut along that line. And then I used ATG adhesive and added a little bit of wet glue to hold this strip of paper down. And then I repeat the same thing with the other 3 strips. The one thing to keep in mind when doing something like this is just to be careful that the corners are lined up. Once again, I'm going to be cutting those corners off, so it wasn't super important that they be perfect. I noticed a very dainty border on one of the pattern papers, so I cut out all those borders, I inked the edges, and then I attached those down. I'm sorry I don't have more footage of that, but you'll see it again in a moment. Now I'm using some foam tape that I had in my stash because I want to pop up that center area of the square. I've had this roll of foam tape in my stash for so long, I was absolutely shocked that the adhesive backing peeled off so easily. And then I layered that square that I've been working on top. And now here you could see the border that I placed all around the square. This is the part that I found a little cringy. I had to cut off the corners of the square that's in the center of the layout. I knew it was really important to do this carefully because if I made a mistake, it would be very difficult to fix. So luckily, my measuring worked out and I was able to cut it so that it fit correctly where I needed it to on the layout. Usually I use my paper trimmer to be sure I'm cutting straight lines, but this was too thick to use in the paper trimmer, so I had to use regular scissors, and I always worry about that. Thank goodness it all worked out okay. Now I'm adding some adhesive to the back of the square, and I am mounting it on the piece of background paper. I was planning on using this cut file for a totally different layout. I had a whole layout planned, and then once I put it on the layout, I decided to take a different route. But I think that this works a little bit better on this particular background. I put some adhesive on the back of it, and then I placed it on the layout with the help of my T-square. One of the images that I absolutely loved from this collection was the teacup with all the flowers in it. I just thought that it was super cute, and I thought that it fit really well underneath the cut file, so I added some adhesive to it and attached that down. Off camera, I did some embossing on one of the chipboard pieces we received in this month's kit. I thought that that looked really nice at the top of the layout. I thought that it went along so well with the mood and the feel of the pattern papers. I embossed it first with some white embossing powder, and then I added some more glittery, sparkly embossing powder over the top. Those were both Martha Stewart embossing powders. I love lots of different types of embellishments. Birds are one of the embellishments that I really enjoy adding to my layouts. There were 2 chipboard birds in the chipboard pack, so I added both of them to the layout, one on either side. I love adding details such as pearls to chipboard pieces. Well, I love adding pearls to lots of places on the layout, but this particular piece of chipboard just seemed to be calling out for some small pearls. So I used a couple of different size pearls. I put some smaller ones that I had to cut apart because they came in strips on there. And then I also used some slightly larger single pearls, and that added a little bit of variety. One of my favorite things about the limited edition kit is that it comes with these gorgeous dimensional flowers. I'm using 3 different flowers on this layout in 3 different colors. I also tucked in a couple of die cut leaves. This piece of chipboard is absolutely gorgeous just as it is, but because I have so much going on my layout, it's a little bit too big to use in one piece. So I cut it into a number of different pieces. I end up using every single piece on my layouts for this month, but for this layout, I'm going to use the longer pieces. I just placed one on the right-hand side of my mat, and then this other one that I'm holding now is also going to be used on this layout, and then I'll put the other 2 pieces aside and I use those on other layouts. I had a couple of these die cut leaves left over from another project, and when I tried them on the layout, I really liked the way they looked, so I decided that I was going to make a couple more. I used a Tessler Crafts Ellentina die set, and I cut quite a few leaves out of some 80-pound smooth white cardstock, and now I'm coloring them using some Distress Oxide in Bundled Sage. I bought this set of dies a while back at a scrapbooking convention, and I really hadn't used it, but I realized that these leaves are the perfect size to use with the Prima and 49 and Market flowers that come in each month's limited edition kit. Using the same embossing powders I used for the other piece of chipboard that's on the page, I embossed those 2 scrolls that I just cut out, and I placed those on opposite sides of the square. Next, I used some gel medium to attach the flowers down to the layout. I had pulled some of the layers of that green flower apart because I thought I wanted the flower to be smaller, but then I changed my mind and decided that that green flower should be nice and big because it's by itself, so I just layered the layers of flower right back in there again using the gel medium. I added the leaves that I just inked to the flower clusters, and then I wanted to attach those chipboard pieces down, and I used some glossy accents to do that. Earlier, I used ATG adhesive to attach that first piece of chipboard down, but I also go back off camera and attach that down using glossy accents. Glossy accents is perfect to hold things like this down to your layouts, so I want to make sure that everything stays put for the long run. I used some strips of 3mm self-adhesive pearls to surround my photo. I added those off camera. I use the glossy accents to attach those down too. Even though they're adhesive, I find that those strips of pearls will sometimes come up from the page later on, especially if they go around a curve. Now I'm adding some pearls to those 2 pieces of chipboard that I just put on the layout. I wanted them to match with the chipboard at the top of the page. I'm again varying the size. I have some slightly smaller pearls and slightly larger pearls just to make it a little more interesting. I realized I wasn't really a fan of the color of the leaves, so I decided that I wanted to go with more of a bluish green color. I thought the green color that I had made the leaves was just a little too washed out looking, so I decided to use some Distress Oxide in Evergreen Bough, and I think that that made the leaves look a little bit more vibrant and matched the layout a little bit more. I used some gel glue to attach the leaves down. You'll see in the final picture, I removed a couple of leaves off of the flower that's in the upper right-hand corner. I think I just had a few too many leaves. but I did pare it down a little bit after I finished making the layout. Sometimes the next day I just start rearranging things and pulling things off of the layout, but I think it looked better with just a couple of leaves. So that was the very last touch. This layout is complete, and here are some close-ups. As always, I'm so grateful that you took time out of your day to watch this video. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all of your views, all of your likes, and all of your lovely comments. Thank you so much. Please take a look in the description box where you'll find a link to the My Creative Scrapbook website. You'll also find links to all of the My Creative Scrapbook social media where you can get lots of inspiration on how you can use your kit. I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.